Hello, this is Unlimited Splash, freshly back from a regional championship tournament in Washington, D.C., where I played tons and tons of Secrets of Strixhaven Limited. In a 3-day non-stop marathon of sealed and draft, I learned so much about what works and what doesn't in this format, and I cannot wait to share it with all of you. Technically, the main event that I was there for is a regional championship. This is, unfortunately, a standard tournament. And if you know anything about me, you know that I don't really play constructed pretty much at all. But this is a very high stakes event. If you win first place, you get $20,000, an invitation to the World Championship, an invitation to the Pro Tour, and even if you fall somewhere in the top 128, you get, over $100 and an invitation to the next regional championship. So because I qualified for this by playing Avatar Sealed last season, I figured, hey, I might as well practice standard a little, register a deck, and play. For me, though, the main draw of this event was the Limited Championship Qualifier. The Limited Championship is a new type of tournament which is basically the Pro Tour for draft. The first one is going to be held in 2027, and it's a major bucket list item of mine to one day qualify for this event. So these days, I'm basically playing in every Limited Championship Qualifier that I can afford to go to and enter. So let me walk you through my weekend of magic and tell you the billion level ups that I've just had in Secrets of Strixhaven. The Regional Championship Qualifier was on Saturday, and the Limited Tournament Qualifier was on Sunday. So because my friends and I arrived Thursday night to get the whole convention in, we had the opportunity to play whatever side events we wanted on the Friday. One of the really cool things that they do at these events is basically run a whole bunch of regional championship qualifiers. So on the Friday, you can play sealed rounds of Secrets of Strixhaven. They had events starting at 9:30, 10:30, 11:30, etc., all throughout the day. You have a few dozen people enter, and whoever wins that event, or two people end up winning in 4 rounds, they get a qualification to a regional championship. So you can use this for the event that's going to happen the next day, hence it's called a last chance qualifier, or you can just use this for the next season. Basically, this is a really efficient way of attending regional championship qualifiers. Where I live, at least, this usually requires driving out somewhere, spending a whole day at a store, and if you get a bum pool or bad draws in your first few rounds, you just have lost your opportunity to qualify for a regional championship on that day. The last chance qualifiers are really nice because you can just stack them up. They're single elimination. So you start building a pool at 9:30, finish by 10:30. Well, you finish by 10, then play your first round. If you lose in 20 minutes, you've already lost the event in time to just go re-queue for another regional championship qualifier at 10:30. It's really bad for your wallet, but it's really good if you're just trying to efficiently get opportunities to qualify for regional championships. So I figured, hey, why not jump into the one at 9:30, see how it goes, and have some fun playing some sealed, brush off the dust and get used to paper sealed Secrets of Strixhaven, which I haven't played that much of, and kind of get ready for the Limited Championship Qualifier on Sunday, which is going to be 1 billion rounds of sealed. So I'm going to show you the pool that I got at 9:30 on Friday. If you're listening audio only, don't worry, I'll talk through all the cards that matter. So when I opened my pool on Friday, I was almost disappointed by how good it was. It was one of these absolute dream pools that I was wasting on just a practice side event. I honestly thought, why the heck could I not have gotten this in the event on Sunday? So in this pool, I opened, number 1, Together as One of the best cards in the format, 6 colorless, Converge, target player draws X, it deals X damage, you gain X life, where X is the number of colors spent on it. It's very easy to make this a deal 4, gain 4, draw 4, which is just absolutely out of control. I got double Exhibition Tidecaller, the 0/2 for 1 that when you cast an instant or sorcery, target player mills 3, but if 5 or more mana was spent to cast it, they mill 10. I got 2 of those things. And then, in case that wasn't good enough for you, I also got a Hardened Academic, the 2/1 in Boros Flying Haste with discard and leave the graveyard synergies, and Antiquities on the Loose, the 1 and 2 white spell that makes 1 billion massive spirit creature tokens. Then I also got a Joint Researchers, the 2/2 first strike for 2, and a Planar Engineering, something that sacrifices a land to find more lands. But basically, Antiquities on the Loose, Hardened Academic, Exhibition Tidecaller, the other Exhibition Tidecaller, and Together as One is really just a list of some of the absolute best cards in the entire format. So those are the rares and mythics. I'm going to line up the pool by color. And if you would like to improve at Limited right along with me, which I'm guessing is why you're watching this, given that that is the entire point of this channel, then I invite you to take a crack at building this pool for yourself. So you could pause the video, look at the cards, and consider what you would play before I show you what I did in a moment. Ready? So I made a decision that I know for a fact several of you will find highly controversial. I left the Hardened Academic and the Antiquities on the Loose in the sideboard. I went with a Simic, splashing red, splashing black game plan entirely based around playing Exhibition Tidecaller and Together as One. I thought that Simic offered me a good combination of stats and mana fixing with the Studious First Year that fetches a land, Shared Roots, which also fetches a land. I needed blue to be playing my Exhibition Tidecaller, but it also gave me access to some pretty good creatures like Matterbending Mage, and which is the 2/2 for 3 that bounces a creature, and Stadium Tidal Mage, which is the 4/4 that when it enters you loot in blue-red. And also tons of really good card advantage like Sleight of Hand, Divergent Equation, the one that returns instants and sorceries from your graveyard, and also Stock Up. A key in any Exhibition Tidecaller deck is there are a few keys. One is how are you going to keep the Exhibition Tidecallers alive? So I did get to play Chase Inspiration, the spell that gives a creature +0/+3 and hexproof until end of turn. I also think that just playing a green-blue plan helps with that. So for example, I had Pestbrood Sloth in my deck, the 4/4 for 4 reach in green. That card is going to draw some removal. Textbook Tabulator, the 0/3 for 3 increment, it's just going to grow and grow and grow. That's going to eat a removal spell. Same with Cuboid Colony. So in contrast to a more Prismari, super controlling, very low creature plan where you run Exhibition Tidecaller and just try to put as many non-creature spells as possible in your deck, I thought that the Simic approach was really interesting, where you try to just play as many removal sponges as you can from green, so that by the time you play your Exhibition Tidecallers, the person has maybe used most of the removal that they had in their pool. Another key, of course, for Exhibition Tidecaller decks is having enough non-creature spells, and especially spells that have mana value 5 or more. So a card that I found really good here was Muse's Encouragement, the 5 mana instant that makes it 3/3 with flying and you surveil 2. That makes a creature, but it triggers Opus, which is, the whole point of the design of that card. Heated Argument was nice. The red 5 mana deal 6, that triggers Opus, so I put that on the splash. Divergent Equation was also really good here because you can pay X = 2 or more, and that's going to trigger your Exhibition Tidecaller, and it gives you the extra benefit that you're bringing spells back from your graveyard. So I can do a play pattern like at the end of your turn, if I've somehow played an Exhibition Tidecaller, and let's say I have Chase Inspiration up, so I'm not too worried about passing to the end of your turn and having it die, then at the end of your turn I can play Divergent Equation for 5, mill you 10 with my Tidecaller. Then I can bring back, let's say, a Heated Argument, and then on my turn cast a Heated Argument, mill you the remaining 10. And if you have 20 cards in your library, you're just dead. So Divergent Equation can often actually be 2 Opus triggers of mana value 5 or more. So very, very efficient card with the Exhibition Tidecaller. And then, of course, Together as One is just a total bomb, but it's also a card that goes well with the Tidecaller. These are 2 amazing A+ bombs that go amazingly together, because I can make you draw with the Together as One and trigger my Tidecaller, for example, or I can use Together as One to dig for my Tidecaller, and either one of them can just win on its own. So I was really happy with this build. If you found a different build that you think you also like, let me know in the comments. Okay, so how did the event go? Match 1 was really funny. Funny if you're me, maybe not so funny if you were my opponent. My opponent had ambitious mana base, let's say, but for a very good reason. They were fitting into their deck both Improvisation Capstone, the 7 mana paradigm spell where you exile cards until you exile ones with total mana value 4 or greater, and then you get to cast them. And also had Moment of Reckoning, probably the best card in the set. 3, 2 white and 2 black. You can choose up to 4 of destroying a permanent or bringing a permanent back from the graveyard. And then, unfortunately for me, they also had the Forum Necroscribe, which is a black creature that when you target it, it lets you bring a creature back from your graveyard to the battlefield. Kind of awesome tech against a mill deck, because I can just mill one of your good creatures and you bring it back. But I will say Improvisation Capstone is maybe not what you want to be doing against the mill plan, because you're basically milling yourself out every turn, although of course it also builds your board presence. Anyways, against this player, I managed to get 2 mill kills. It's very scary to go up against a deck like this in a single elimination tournament, right? If I lose, I'm straight up out of the event, my dream pool is dead in the water and I have to go get another pool. But game 1, I managed to just land 2 Tide Callers and mill my opponent out for 20 with some 5-mana spell. Game 2, I found a pretty nice line where I had 2 Exhibition Tide Callers out and they were capstoning me and had Moment of Reckoning, and it was just going absolutely off for them. And in my hand, I had just Divergent Equation and Muse's Encouragement, the 3/3 for 5. So I counted the cards in their library. They had 22 cards left. And what I did was play Muse's Encouragement, mill them for 20, and I had just enough mana to play Divergent Equation for x equals 0 to get 2 different cast triggers and mill them out. So that was very satisfying for me. Match 2, my opponent was on a funny dragons plan. He had a Quandrix the Proof, the 6/6 Quandrix dragon that has Cascade and gives all of your instants and sorceries Cascade. And he also had Prismari, the 7/7 ward pay 5 life that gives all of your instants and sorceries Storm. So if he had them both out at once, his instants and sorceries would have Cascade and also Storm, not to mention 13 power and toughness in the air. Game 1, I managed to mill him out in the same way that I was always milling people out. Game 2, I got into a nasty spot where he landed a Prismari and the only removal, or the only answer that I had was to remove it, spot removal. But he very smartly held a Burst Lightning so that when I grapple with Death his Prismari at 7 life, paying the ward cost of 5 and going down to 2, he was able to just Burst Lightning me in the face and end it right there. One more game loss and I'm straight up out of the tournament because these are best of 3 rounds and I just lost a game in match 2. So that could have been the end of me. This match made me appreciate a deep subtlety in playing 2 Exhibition Tide Callers. I often was sandbagging an Exhibition Tide Caller for a very long time and also a 5-mana spell, because just playing a Tide Caller and playing a 5-mana spell into open mana could either have the Tide Caller eat a counter spell, depending on the colors your opponent is playing, or successfully mill them for 10, but then have the Tide Caller eat a removal spell before you're going to draw and get to cast another 5-mana spell. So often I was waiting for a second Tide Caller. But you get into this funny situation where if I play 1 Tide Caller, so suppose I have 2 Tide Callers in my hand and a 5-mana spell. What I want to do is play Tide Caller, mill you for 20, and that's often by, turn 10 or something, more than enough to win the game. The problem you get into is if I play a Tide Caller, then I play a Tide Caller, while the second Tide Caller is on the stack, my opponent could kill the first Tide Caller. Then I could cast the 5-mana spell in response, but it's only going to mill them for 10 because only 1 Tide Caller has resolved so far. So trying to cast 2 Tide Callers on the same turn gives your opponent a priority opening before you would get both spell triggers from having the priority to play your 5-mana spell. So if you think they have a removal spell, you might want to wait until you have 2 5-mana spells to play a Tide Caller, then play your 5-mana spell. If they deal with your Tide Caller, you could play your second Tide Caller after that, play your 5-mana spell, or at least have a backup 5-mana spell for if the second Tide Caller gets removed, basically trying to find any line to manage to mill them for 20. If you think they have counter magic though, instead of removal, you're happy to play both Tide Callers one after the other, because then they'll counter the first one, but the second one is going to stick. And if you don't think that they also have removal, maybe that does give you time to just draw your second 5-mana spell. So needless to say, that kind of logic really hurt my brain. But I followed a line like that and ended up with a Tide Caller just sitting there slowly milling the opponent down rather than going for a mega kill all at once. And something really funny happened. When he had 6 cards left in his deck, he was willing to show me the secret tech that he'd been concealing for the first 2 games, which was that he had main decked Armageddon, destroy all lands. But when he cast it, he didn't have any board presence, and I had an Armageddon, or I had an Exhibition Tide Caller, after the Armageddon, and he only had 6 cards left in his deck. So we just sat there while he drew out the remaining 6 cards, looking for any answer among them, but he didn't have one. So round 2 to me, 2-0. He told me later his dream was to play the Quandrix Dragon and Cascade into the Armageddon, which is totally awesome. Match 3, I had a really tight matchup against a black aggro deck. I picked up game 1, they picked up game 2, and then game 3 was bonkers. They got me all the way down to 1 HP, and they were doing it with Postmortem Professor, the 2/2 that when it attacks drains you for 1, and you can exile an instant or sorcery card to return it from your graveyard to the battlefield. The life total sheet shows just how much draining was going on. Our life totals were changing every single turn. They got me all the way down to 1 HP, and they had 13 cards in their deck. So on a previous turn, the turn or 2 turns before this, I had actually top decked my 1 copy of Run Behind exactly in time to save myself from the drain trigger on their post-mortem professor. So that kept me alive to get 1 more draw. In my hand, I had an Exhibition Tidecaller, and I had a Together as One. But at that time, they had 15 or 16 cards in their library. So I didn't have quite enough to just mill them out. But by the time that they recast the post-mortem professor and it actually was able to attack, they had me dead next turn, guaranteed, just by attacking and draining me. And by the way, I had already used my Tome Blast, and I had already used my Run Behind, so I think I had no more answers left in my deck. When I magically drew a Swamp, which completed the last color that I needed to cast Together as One. The reason that matters is if I could have just double milled them down to 1 card or 2 cards left, they would have been able to draw their last card or their second last card, attack with a post-mortem professor, and kill me. But the Swamp for Together as One was exactly the color that I needed to cast Together as One, drain them for 10, and force them to draw 4. Because Together as One says target player draws 4 cards, or draws X cards, and here X was 4. So I could mill them 10, target them with the draw, and that was exactly enough to make them draw down to 0 cards in the library, go to their turn, have nothing to draw, and lose before they got to attack with Postmortem Professor. If my opponent is watching this, I'm sorry, that was a bad beat. But it did mean that I did not get single eliminated from the event, and I got to go on to the finals, which was honestly the least eventful part of it. My opponent quickly beat me game 1, but then game 2 and game 3, I got mill wins basically by finding the lines to resolve Exhibition Tidecaller, despite the fact that my opponent had a Disdainful Stroke, Essence Scatter, and Mana Sculpt, so just a whole bunch of different counters. I was able to land the Tidecaller, get my cast triggers, and win by finding the right moment to try it out. So I did manage to 4-0 the Last Chance Qualifier, which means I'm now queued for next regional championship season, which gave me some nice insurance because it meant that even if I totally scrubbed out of the event on Saturday, then hey, I get to try again next time. 2 big learnings, well, 3 big learnings. I mean, obviously Exhibition Tidecaller and Together as One are completely busted cards. So is Stock Up, by the way, if you're in a combo deck like this. Another learning is redundancy in the Exhibition Tidecaller plane is so good. So many times opponents had seen me at the tournament with Exhibition Tidecaller. You know, they were seated next to me in a round where I milled someone for 20, and that's like a thing that kind of perks people's ears up so people notice. But they did not realize that I had 2 Exhibition Tidecallers. So they would, for example, hold on to 1 copy of removal. I would play the Tidecaller, mill them 10. They would remove my Tidecaller. And then the next turn I would play another Tidecaller, mill them 10 again. And that was game. So that was really crucial. I will also say Chase Inspiration, the +0/+3 hexproof trick, is another way of having redundancy in your Tidecaller plan. If you can resolve the Tidecaller, people don't necessarily expect you to have protection for the Tidecaller main decked. And it's protection that gets you an extra 3 cards milled off of their deck. The third piece of wisdom that I took away from this is there's actually a strategy in paper to asking your opponent when they, or how many cards they have left in their library, to when you should ask them that. Because the moment you ask them that, they assume that you have Tidecaller in your hand and that you're planning to cast Tidecaller and start milling them. So you want to make sure that it's not a tell, but also Tidecaller often requires completely precise calculations about how many cards are left. Because if you mill them out and you're off by 2 or 3 cards and they're an aggressive deck with strong board presence, 3 turns could easily be enough to just kill you even after you've milled them out. So that was an interesting skill that I did not practice online at all, and something to think about if you ever try to do the Tidecaller thing in paper. Be mindful of when exactly you're asking your opponent how many cards are left in their deck. Do it sometimes when you have the Tidecaller, sometimes when you don't, but obviously not enough to be a complete nuisance. So you're always making the person count their library, which is pretty tedious. All right, so that was the Last Chance Qualifier. After that, I was pretty magicked out. On Saturday, though, I played in the main event, the Regional Championship. I played a Mardu discard deck that I completely took from someone online. I mean, it's one of the main decks in the meta right now. It uses Cool But Rude from Ninja Turtles to basically burn the opponent out with discarding cards. You can completely empty your hand to cards like Hardened Academic or Iron Shield Elf, and the idea is you know, you play cool but rude when your opponent's at 10 and you have 5 cards in your hand to level it up, and then you just discard all 5 cards and kill them. And there are some like less aggressive or less gimmicky lines, but basically it's just an aggro deck. I don't really want to talk about how the event went. I practiced standard for like 5 hours total. I find that I just don't really enjoy constructed. And I managed to only lose in the event, get 0 wins in constructed. And it didn't really bother me because for me in life, if you work for something, then maybe you can expect some results and hold yourself to a certain standard. If you don't work for it at all, then you're not really entitled to expect results, right? And I recognized about myself that I did not work for this at all. I think maybe I'll try harder when it's modern season, but then again, maybe not. But the structure of these events is that if you're top 128, you get $125 and a regional championship invitation. And my performance in the last chance qualifier got me about $90 of event tickets and a regional championship invitation. So I'm going to say I'm good enough at sealed that it works out to being in the top 128 in standard, because I got basically the same thing for my sealed performance as you would get for a top 128 standard performance. But in standard, I'm definitely in like the bottom 1% at an event like this, which is fine. Before I talk about the main event, for me at least, which was a limited tournament qualifier, the thing that I was actually taking seriously, the part that the entire weekend was leading up to for me, I should mention that after I dropped out of the event on Saturday, I played in an on-demand draft, which is literally, it's the most casual event you can play at an event like this. You just kind of wander up and express interest in drafting, and as soon as they can form a pod, they just put you all together and you go draft. And it's a lot of people who are maybe like local to the town and just want to go play a little bit of fun Magic, in contrast to a last chance qualifier, which has tons of people who have like played in the Pro Tour and that kind of thing. And anyways, the reason I'm bringing it up is I got a deck that had Exhibition Tidecaller and Brain Freeze in it. So I had another 3 rounds of tight Tidecaller Magic. I won't bore you with the details because this was a 0 stakes event basically. I mean, I think $10 were on the line or something, but it was so funny that the Tidecaller was following me around all weekend. And in this draft, I actually got the Tidecaller and 2 Chase Inspirations. I was sideboarding those in and out. And I also didn't main deck Brain Freeze because it's so bad against aggro. And I had a really funny sequence where the opponent had 20 cards in his library and I had in hand Exhibition Tidecaller, Chase Inspiration, and Brain Freeze. Now, you might think that with Exhibition Tidecaller, I'm going to need 2 5-mana spells to mill the opponent out. But what I did was, he was a highly controlling Prismari deck. I had sideboarded in all of my protection for my Exhibition Tidecallers. I'd been holding on to it the whole game. But finally, I realized, even if he has a removal spell, I can go Exhibition Tidecaller, Chase Inspiration. If he lets it resolve, it has hexproof, so there's nothing that he can do about that. If he doesn't let it resolve, I get to cast the other Chase Inspiration on the Tidecaller. And then even if he spends his removal, then I can play my Brain Freeze. So long as he didn't counter my first Tidecaller, I was in the clear. And we'd already played 2 games. This was game 3 of the final. So I was pretty sure that he only had 1 Essence Scatter, which he had also played earlier on. Because once again, I was on this Simic plan where I'm trying to sponge up my opponent's anti-creature stuff with green stats. So anyways, I was pretty sure I'd gotten the Essence Scatter out of his hand. So I played the Tidecaller, it resolved. I played Chase Inspiration, mill 3. Played the other Chase Inspiration, mill another 3. Then I played Brain Freeze. I had played Tidecaller, Chase, and Chase that turn. So that's Storm Count 3. So that's Brain Freeze plus 3 copies and an Opus trigger for Brain Freeze, which is 21 cards of mill. So we had to get a judge come over and assist us to make sure we were resolving the whole stack correctly, but it exactly decked him out. So that was, again, a pretty brutal Tidecaller kill. So the Tidecallers were definitely calling to me this weekend. All right, let's talk about what I was there for, the limited championship qualifier. In my opinion, the highest stakes, only limited events that are happening right now, until of course, the limited championship itself starts up next year. While I talk about that, I want to quickly say, if you're enjoying this story time and all of the lessons that I learned from Secrets of Strixhaven and getting better at limited with me, with positively minded, improver-oriented content, make sure that you subscribe to my channel on YouTube. This story time is a rare exception from my usual video format, but I do like to talk through the lessons that I learned by putting my actual money on the line, going to these big events and playing against the cream of the crop, the best limited players that there are. at least in my region. I do also post weekly data deep dive videos that help you understand what's good and what's not in the format, and my bread and butter, daily, Monday to Friday, draft and sealed gameplay. So if you want to get better with me, make sure to subscribe. All right, so I sit down Sunday morning, 8:30 a.m., crack open my packs, and what do I see? Honestly, it kind of felt like a nightmare. All you want at a big event like this is something to work with. I'm not saying I want the most crack pool in the world, although out of 500 players, the structure is you have to get into the top 32 with your sealed deck. Then those 32 people are organized into 4 draft pods of single elimination draft, and whoever wins the draft gets a qualification. So your sealed pool needs to carry you to the top 32 out of 500 people, almost like a little bit more than 0.5% top. I mean a little bit more than the top 5% of players, top 6% of players or whatever. And then you're going to have to spike a draft among those people. And that's just to get invited to the limited championship. So word on the street was that the record that you needed out of 7 rounds was 6 wins, 1 loss. And maybe some people would get in with 5 wins, 1 loss, and 1 draw. So you have 1 loss to give, maybe, if you want to get to draft. So your sealed pool needs to be able to win 6 games out of 7 against increasingly stiff competition. So a cracked pool is nice, but at least you want a really solid pool that's going to be able to put up a fight all day long. And this did not look like it. So I had a few good rares. Emeritus of Ideation, the 5/5 for 5 with Ancestral Recall attached. Okay, that is an A+ bomb. Always nice to see an A+ bomb in your pool. Ambitious Augmenter, the 1/1 for 1 green that grows, and then when it dies, it moves its counters onto a brand new creature. That's a very strong rare, for sure. Slumbering Trudge, basically a 6/6 for 4. That's a good one as well. Resonating Loot and Cauldron of Essence, these two have a place, okay, like they have a deck, but then everything else felt like a complete whiff. I mean, Prismatic Ending is okay, X and a white, Converge, exile a non-land permanent if its mana value is less than or equal to the number of colors spent to cast a spell. Okay, it's a removal spell in a specific deck. Zaphi and the Tempest, a 7/7 for 7 that basically does nothing. Nita, a 2/3 for 3 that basically does nothing. I'm being a little glib. I know they do something, but these are not the cards that you're looking to run in this context. The Dawning Archaic, a 7/7 for 10 that gets a discount for instants and sorceries, and when it attacks, you can play one from your graveyard. Looks like a mega bomb. It just isn't. The way it's played out in this format is basically too little, too late. And then I wasted a rare slot on Petrified Hamlet, the land that blanks a land or something. So I was feeling very disappointed. At least I had Emeritus of Ideation. I could cast some Ancestral Recalls, but everything else, and the 2 green rares are pretty good, but everything else really felt like a whiff. So again, I'm going to organize my pool by color. And I want to invite you, if you're watching the video and you want to get better at Magic right along with me, go ahead and think about what deck you would build out of these cards. Pause the video and consider. Are you ready? So basically, my first instinct was to go Simic so that I could play Slumbering Trudge, Ambitious Augmenter, and also the Emeritus of Ideation. But by the way, it's 8:30 a.m. You're traveling, so you're a little out of sorts, and you only get half an hour to register your pool. So you have to make a lot of snap judgments. And the way that these competitive events work in Sealed is you have to play whatever you registered for the first game of every round. So if you're still in the tournament at 5 p.m., battling it out to make top 32, whatever decision you made at 8:41 to leave that rare on the sideboard and put in that common, that is going to haunt you. These tiny little micro decisions that you make in a snap judgment out of the billion decisions that you're making in that half hour of deck building, that will follow you for game 1 every single match for the rest of the day. So you need to be on your toes enough to make very good instinctive decisions. And basically my instinct here was, as much as I wanted to play Sultai, I had so much success this weekend already by playing green, blue, splash some black, splash some red. That had just been a great recipe for me with those Exhibition Tide color decks. I really did not find it in these cards. My green was just a little bit too shallow, a little bit too many clunkers. I would have to end up playing like a bunch of cards like Emil, the 3/3 for 3 that kind of slowly makes creatures, Shopkeeper's Bane, the 4/2 for 3, which can be fine. I played it in another deck that weekend that went well, but it just was not really playing a role that made any sense. My mana also looked pretty bad for Sultai. I have a Spectacle Summit splashing into green blue. I have a Titan's Grave for blue-red. I have a Titan's Grave for black-green, and I have a Terramorphic Expanse. But the mana just did not look good for an assertive green-based deck. It just wasn't really there. So here's what I ended up building. The deck that I went with was an extremely controlling Prismari deck. Instead of green-blue, splash a little bit of black, splash a little bit of red, this time it was blue-red, splash a little bit of green, splash a little bit of black. So all weekend I was playing these blue controlling decks with no white. That was kind of the through line. But the idea of this deck, and I can't even really explain why it ticked so well, but the idea was, you know, I'm always wanting to play Emeritus of Ideation. I have this Resonating Loot that gives me 1 billion mana to play around with, and I have a Divergent Equation. I really want to play my Tome Blasts. I was splashing black for Bitter Triumph, but that was kind of all of my removal. So then I main decked some counters, Disdainful Stroke, Essence Scatter, and Spell Pierce. And also Artistic Process was good removal. And doing the 4-color thing meant that I got to play Arcane Omens, one of my best cards. The 4 and a black, target player discards Converge, X equal to Converge. I did splash green for Slumbering Trudge, but I did not splash it for the Ambitious Augmenter. I'm not totally sure that this was correct, but basically my idea was by the time you want to play Ambitious Augmenter in your curve, which is turn 1, you do not really want, you can't really do that consistently if it's on the splash, right? And if I'm splashing and playing Ambitious Augmenter on turn 7, how good is it really going to be? A 1/1 on turn 7? Not really what I want to see. But Slumbering Trudge, a 6/6, that's just good all the way along the curve. On turn 7, if I draw it, I could double spell Slumbering Trudge and Quick Study or something. Slumbering Trudge, hold up a counter. All of that sounds awesome. In a moment of whimsy, I played Zealous Lorecaster, Transcendent Archaic, and the Dawning Archaic. So Transcendent Archaic, the 6/6 for 7 Vigilance. When it enters, you draw X equal to Converge and discard 2. And the Dawning Archaic, that's 7/7 for 10 that we talked about earlier. I thought I had enough non-creature spells to make this cost 6 or 7. And I have been trying lately, a big level up for me has been to try to make my sealed pools lean towards impact rather than leaning towards tempo. If you're building a tempo deck, that's another thing. But I found that when I was building a control deck, I would have in a bunch of cards that were trying to make me go a little bit faster or not die to aggro. But one good way to not die to aggro is have really good 4 drops, really good 5 drops, a really good play every single time you have 6 mana. So basically the first thing you should ask about any limited deck is like, what's the plan? How does it win? And the plan of this deck is very simple. I am playing enough 2 mana interactive stuff like Essence Scatter, Bitter Triumph, Double Tome Blast that I can hopefully hold you at bay for turns 1, 2, 3, 4, that kind of thing. Then by the time we get to turn 5, I have Resonating Loot with enough instants and sorceries that it can just go bonkers. Like Resonating Loot into Arcane Omens is a win probably right there. Resonating Loot will let you on turn 5 play your Tome Blast and flash it back, I believe. Yeah, that's fine. And then with a little bit more mana left to play something else if you want to. Basically, Resonating Loot with this many instants and sorceries makes it a win condition. And Divergent Equation without or especially with the Resonating Loot is basically a win con. It can bring back your Artistic Process to make some creatures. It can bring back your Tome Blast to give you an extra cast on it. And then of course I have a healthy top end of creatures. So by the time I've kind of held you at bay for a while, hopefully I'm just going Haymaker after Haymaker after Haymaker, Slumbering Trudge into Emeritus of Ideation into Zealous Lorecaster in the dream scenario, of course. So I try to exhaust your resources and then I play really big top end finishers. That's the idea of the deck. So how did it go for me? Match 1 was really fun. My opponent was on some kind of Naya mid-range build, so white, red, green. At first I was worried that it would be a highly aggressive deck, but it really wasn't. I mulliganed to 4 in game 1, which was terrible. They were just all 1-landers. I think I drew a 0-lander into 2 or 3 1-landers, and I just had to go down to 4, which is not where you want to be. But a kind of a funny thing is that I did draw Emeritus of Ideation and also Arcane Omens, both of which can easily get 3 cards back. so it kind of undoes your mulligan to 4. He did manage to beat me, but because I had the option of playing those 2 cards, if I'd had just a little bit more time, I think I could have stabilized and actually had a chance of winning, which felt awesome. Here's one little mental trick for you. If you're someone who gets upset by mulliganing, start paying attention to how close you are after the mulligan. After you mulligan, try your hardest to win and just track how far behind am I? If I had that extra 1, 2, or in my case, 3 cards, would I be in this game? My answer was resoundingly yes. With 3 extra cards from the beginning, I had no doubt I would have been, not no doubt I would have been winning, but I think I would have been heavily favored in the match. Had many opportunities to catch up with those 3 extra cards. So that actually made me feel really good about my deck. It was almost a positive experience. I was like, you know what, deck, you have a lot of game. If I can mulligan to 4 and kind of be neck and neck with him for like 7, 8 turns, and then he just pulls out ahead eventually with 1 extra resource, hey, I think my deck's pretty darn good in that case. Game 2, so I did lose game 1, but then game 2, my deck proved me right with an Emeritus of Ideation on turn 6, draw 3 cards, and now you have a 5/5 flying ward 2 that you have to deal with. The thing about Emeritus of Ideation to keep in mind, especially if you're against an opponent who does not have access to blue mana and therefore counter spells, is that it does not cost 3 and 2 blue. Emeritus of Ideation costs 3 and 3 blue. It is a turn 6 drop, please. There were so many situations where if I dropped my Emeritus of Ideation on 5 and just crossed my fingers and hoped that it survived to my turn, I would not have gotten to Ancestral Recall, and I would not have won the game. In game 3, I had another really fun and quite grotesque situation, which again, if my opponent is watching this, I'm sorry to you. I played Resonating Lute on turn 4 or something, and I was arranging the whole game to try to keep 7 cards in hand and draw off of the Lute's tap ability to draw a card if you have 7 or more cards in your hand. The interesting thing about this, which is a best of 3 subtlety that you don't get to learn and practice the art of if you mainly play best of 1 online, is that I actually kept an extremely slow hand game 3, even though he was in supposedly aggressive colors of white, red, and green, because I had the read from the first 2 games that his deck was actually extremely mid-range. I had not seen a lot of early threats. So I kept a hand with Resonating Lute, a bunch of lands, 0 creatures, I don't know, maybe like a Disdainful Stroke. I actually kept it, and I felt very happy about keeping it because I believed most of the stuff that caused me issues was coming down on turn 4, 5, 6, or later. And I actually got totally rewarded for it. So I ended up playing Resonating Lute. Then I had a situation where I had to trade down a bunch of resources, like play a Bitter Triumph, play a Tome Blast, play an Artistic Process, just keep 1-for-1ing his stuff until eventually I only had 3 cards in hand. But then I drew Divergent Equation. And then I had this just gross play where I Divergent Equationed for enough cards that I filled my hand from 3 up to 7. I think I Divergent Equationed for 9 mana, bringing back 4 cards, filling my hand up to 7, and then my loot is back online. So then I get to draw a card off of the loot, and then I'm just 1-for-1ing from a position of massive advantage every turn, drawing 2 cards every turn. So that was that. I got match 1 win despite my multi 4. My opponent did mulligan to 6 every game, so, you know, it's not like I had bad luck. We mulligan the same number of cards total. I just got all my bad luck out in game 1, but managed to get there in match 1. So I was 1-0 out of 7 rounds. Match 2, though, was a much more painful situation. So I won't make a long story out of this because it was very quick work that my opponent made of me. Unfortunately, he played 2 copies of the Mindful Biomancer, the 2/2 for 2 that has 3. This creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn, activate only once each turn. And you'll note in my pool 2 pieces that I did not have for common level red and blue removal are Run Behind and Unsubtle Mockery. I didn't even have Impractical Joke to deal 3 damage, although that doesn't help against Biomancer. My main removal was 2 copies of Tome Blast, which deals 2 damage, and Artistic Process, which can deal 2 damage to each creature I don't control. Notice that the Biomancer does not get +2/+2 at sorcery speed. It's only once each turn. So if I Tome Blast his Biomancer, he can give his guy +2/+2 and blank my Tome Blast. Unfortunately for me, he had 2 Mindful Biomancers in his deck. He drew them in his opener or very shortly after it, both games, and cleverly always kept the mana up. A weird advantage that he had, which was totally unlikely, is that in this 500 person tournament, my round 2 opponent was the person who registered my sealed pool. This is not an opponent. This is the person who sits across from you at the table before the event begins, and they're there to check to make sure basically that you're not sneaking cards into the event. So they actually look very carefully through your entire sealed pool in an extremely precise ritualistic process. So he knew very well all the cards in my deck, and I knew very well all the cards in his deck. So I knew he only had 2 Biomancers, and he kept seeing them. Unfortunately for me, he actually remembered basically all of my red and blue removal was Tome Blast, because you're sitting there for a long time looking at the other person's pool, and it's very natural for your mind to wander to like, what would I build? And he told me after the match he had already thought about like what my blue red deck would look like. So he, kudos to him, huge credit to him, had a very good idea of what he was playing around, got cards that could play around it perfectly, and successfully dodged it. And he just killed me like really quickly. So that was unfortunate for me. I was 1 win, 1 loss in a 7-round event where you can only give 1 loss. So I was kind of feeling like, oh, this might not be a long run here. Match 3, I played against someone who also was on the exhibition Tide Color plan. So this person was trying to play their Tide Color, find enough 5-mana spells, and mill me out. Luckily for me, I had played a Tide Color deck to a 3-0 result in a draft the day before, and a double Tide Color deck to a 4-0 result in a last chance qualifier 2 days before. So I figured out that this was a Tide Color strategy pretty quickly, and I knew that I didn't have that many answers in my deck, but one answer that I did have was Essence Scatter. And he basically didn't have any creatures that I ever needed to Essence Scatter. So I just held up Essence Scatter, Spell Pierce, Disdainful Stroke, and so on the entire game, with the idea that the moment he plays his Exhibition Tide Color, I'm going to Essence Scatter it, and then if he counters my Essence Scatter with, say, a Brush Off, then I'm going to be able to Disdainful Stroke or maybe Spell Pierce that Brush Off. So I was just holding up an entire removal package ready for his Tide Color, and the way that our decks lined up, that was enough. As soon as I saw that Tide Color game 2, he was unable to cast it or unable to resolve it because I had the whole counter family ready for him. And game 1, it had just taken him too long to find the Tide Color because it was kind of his only win condition. He actually almost went to decking, and I just killed him on damage that game. So my Tide Color experience paid off very nicely here, and I managed to get a clean 2-0. So I was 2 wins, 1 loss. Game 3, or match 4, sorry. I unfortunately in game 1 had to mulligan down to 5. He played a turn 1 Harmonized Trio, which is a 1/1 for 1 that you tap some creatures, it becomes prepared, and the prepared spell is Brainstorm. You know how I feel about this card if you've watched me draft online. The person just takes so many game actions. This was the place for it though, obviously, like he should try to win. But it was a little bit dispiriting to watch my opponent just do absolutely everything, take a trillion game actions every turn, while I had absolutely nothing to do. He also had a very nice package where the main reason that Brainstorm is not so good is that you quickly get stuck with 3 lands that you're just like picking up and putting back down over and over. Like the cards that you're putting back in your deck are not very good. So you need to pair Brainstorm with a way to get rid of them. He had a clever little package where the classic way of doing this is with fetch lands, right? I sacrifice a fetch land, I draw 3, put back 2 bad cards, then I sacrifice a fetch land, get a land, and that lets me shuffle my deck. So I've actually gotten rid of the bad cards that I put in. That's a classic way to make Brainstorm better. He had done this with Terramorphic Expanse. So there are no fetch lands per se in this set, but Terramorphic Expanse is a kind of a fetch land. And so he made a Brainstorm fetch package at home by having this Harmonized Trio and Terramorphic Expanse combo to get rid of the bad cards. So that was really clever. I liked that. And that's a tip that, maybe you can use to make Harmonized Trio better. Anyways, I lost, but again, I used this mental trick that I've become pretty fond of, which is, hey, I mulliganed to 5. He was going off, but I actually didn't lose by that much. I could easily imagine a good draw or 2 getting me the win. So that felt like, hey, maybe my deck is not at all hopeless in this matchup. Game 2, he got stuck on 3 lands, and I hit Emeritus of Ideation on turn 6 and cast Ancestral Recall, and he pretty much scooped immediately. Game 3, he was playing a sort of Prismari tempo aggro-ish deck, and so he actually got me really low on life. But then I had a really nice line that I found where he was at 11 life I had out Thunderdrum Soloist, the 1/3 reach that when you cast an instant or sorcery, it deals 1 damage, but if you spend 5 mana, it deals 3 damage. I realized I could play an Artistic Process, the 5 mana spell that makes a 3/3 flying haste, burn him for 3, so he's down to 8 now, attack for 3, that puts him down to 5, and then I had a Tome Blast in my graveyard, which I had enough mana, thanks to the Resonating Loot, of course, to flash back, targeting him, Opus Trigger for 3, that brings him down to 2, and then the Tome Blast deals the last 2 damage. It was beautiful for me. Again, probably pretty feels bad for him. But yeah, then I was at 3 wins, 1 loss, climbing my way back up. Match 5, I had a game where it was against a teamer opponent. We had a really tight race after he played a Vastland Scavenger, which is the 4/4 for 3 that mills cards and you can get a creature back. I found a Slumbering Trudge and blocked some of his stuff down. He ended up managing to kill it. But then I found Emeritus just in time when I was at about 8 HP facing a pretty big board, played it, Ancestral Recall, and then just drew my way out of it. I had developed by this time a pretty good aggro plan, a pretty good sideboard plan for aggro. Some cards you probably haven't thought about much. The Goblin Glasswrite. It is a 2/2 for 2 that makes treasures. I was playing Strife Scholar, the 3/2 for 3 that can make 2 2/2s. And Tackle Artist, the 4/3 for 4, and I had some other like totally clunky little creatures that I could sideboard in against aggro. What I was sideboarding out every single match, and I do wish that I'd built my deck a little differently in this regard, I took out Dawning Archaic every time, Transcendent Archaic every time, and Zealous Lorecaster against aggro enough decks. I really wish that I hadn't put the 2 Archaics in my deck. They just were not earning their keep. It was a mistake. I should have put in Tackle Artist for sure, at least over Dawning Archaic. Or maybe over a Transcendent Archaic. They're probably similarly bad in the deck. So that was maybe a way that I could have picked up some wins. Like perhaps if I'd had Tackle Artist in my deck, I would have drawn it against my match 2 opponent who clobbered me with the Biomancers, and I would have stood more of a shot. Anyways, game 2 of match 5, my opponent witnessed something pretty grotesque when I went Goblin Glasswrite on turn 2, made a treasure on turn 3, and played, I don't know, Landscape Painter. On turn 4, I played Resonating Loot, still have the treasure. On turn 5, I got to play Emeritus, use the treasure to cast Ancestral Recall. And yeah, that was pretty much it. There's not that much more to say about that match. So 4 wins, 1 loss. Now remember, you need 6 wins and at most 1 loss out of 7 in order to win this event. That meant that I had gone from 1 win, 1 loss all the way up to a place where if I could just win 2 matches in a row, I would, I think, be guaranteed to make the top 32. That would mean that I would get to draft for a chance at the limited tournament, limited championship. Well, match 6, I had a really interesting match against white-black aggro. Game 1 was extremely lopsided. He played Grave Researcher on 3, the 3/3 for 3 that surveils 1 and eventually gives you a reanimate. He played the White Emeritus, the 3/3 for 3 that makes a 1/1, and if you give the 1/1 to the opponent, you get Swords to Plowshares. And it all led up to Moment of Reckoning, the 7 mana spell that destroys and returns a bunch of stuff. So that was, you know, not the best. I mean, this is the kind of a thing that you'll run into at the 4 wins, 1 loss bracket of a big event like this. I mean, everyone's going to have a great pool, but that was really a tour de force. Game 2, I actually managed to win, although he did flood badly, but I felt really in control. I think even without the flood, I would have put up a very good fight, if not won. Game 3, he demonstrated why Strixhaven Sky Coach is so good, because remember, a huge weakness of my control deck is that the main removal was Sorcery Speed Deal 2s, the 2 Tome Blasts and the Artistic Process. Strixhaven Sky Coach is not a creature during my turn, so unless I can make him turn it on during my turn, which is hard to do, my removal spells are blank against it. So he really showed why this card is so good. He played 2 Strixhaven Sky Coaches, and he was just dealing 6 to me in the air every turn, which you cannot sustain for a long time. On turn 5, I had an interesting situation. I was thinking about whether I should play my Emeritus of Ideation as a blocker against the Strixhaven Sky Coaches. The upside is it's a 5/5 blocker in the air. If I get to untap after it, then I get to play Ancestral Recall. But the downside, of course, is I'm giving him a turn to just kill my Emeritus of Ideation. So I thought for a long while, and I did another one of these things that you only get to do in best of 3. I realized, as far as I could tell from the first 2 games, the only removal spell he had that could kill Emeritus of Ideation, there were 2. One was Feed the Swarm. This is a mystical archives card, which are much rarer in your packs than other cards. It's not like a Last Gasp or something that could pop up a bunch. If you have Feed the Swarm, it's probably your only copy, but he had shown it to me the first 2 games. So I was thinking, I don't think that I can play my Emeritus, because if he has Feed the Swarm, my Emeritus is just dead here. Also, his Emeritus, Emeritus of Truce, could kill my Emeritus if he makes a 1/1 flyer for me, and then Swords to Plowshares my Emeritus. So I thought, because he has 2 ways of killing Emeritus, I don't think I should do it. Feed the Swarm is way worse for me than if he plays Emeritus of Truce and Swords to Plowshares it, because then I am just not even getting life back. Well, I was thinking all of this on his turn 5 his turn 5 before he passed to my turn 5. And lo and behold, I had just played a Tackle Artist on turn 4, and he Feed the Swarmed it at the end of his turn. So then I thought, you know what? I reasoned it out, and I have to go with what I reasoned. So I boldly played my Emeritus on Ideation on turn 5. He gave me a little bit of a fright when he tapped 2 white and a black for something, and I was worried it would be Emeritus of Truce and he would Swords to Plowshares my Emeritus of Ideation. But it turned out to be a Inkwright, Informed Inkwright. Imperious Inkmage, the 3/3 for 3 when it enters Surveil 2. So he surveilled some stuff in the bin. I got to keep my Emeritus, go to my turn, I Ancestral Recall. But it turns out that he had found a really, really nice line. What he did next was he played his Grave Researcher again. This is the 3/3 for 3 that becomes prepared when you have 3 or more creatures in your graveyard, and then you can reanimate something, return a creature from any graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. By surveilling creatures into the graveyard the turn before, he had made it so that his Grave Researcher would become prepared. It actually becomes prepared at the beginning of your upkeep, so I didn't have removal for it the next turn, go to his upkeep, and he actually got to return my own Tackle Artist to play. And then he basically just had enough damage that he was able to push lethal around my 5/5 flyer. I had an interesting situation where on the turn that he actually basically did lethal damage to me, I was holding a Spell Pierce and a Divergent Equation, and he started the whole sequence with a Cost of Brilliance. I thought about Spell Piercing his Cost of Brilliance, even though he had way more than enough mana to pay the 2 and not have it countered, just to try to speed bump him a little bit. But that is a really feels bad thing to do. Mainly, I was holding up Spell Pierce all of game 2 and game 3 because I had seen Moment of Reckoning and I didn't want to get got by that. The thing is, though, the way that it played out, it actually might have been better for me to Spell Pierce his Cost of Brilliance. Then when he pays the 2, Divergent Equation my Spell Pierce back from the graveyard, Spell Pierce the Cost of Brilliance again. That actually still wouldn't have countered it, but it would have tapped him out on the turn when he like quadruple spelled from the things he drew from the Cost of Brilliance and was able to deal lethal to me. I ended up losing the game with Spell Pierce and Divergent Equation stuck in my hand because I just didn't have enough time to activate whatever I was trying to do. So actually it would have been better for me the way that things played out to throw away a ton of material just to try to slow him down a little bit and get myself an extra draw. And maybe, I don't know, but maybe by drawing 1 extra card, I could have turned the tides eventually. So just an interesting thing, at least think about these kind of wacky lines where you try to tap your opponent out by throwing material at them, even if it 2 for 0s you. If you think you're in a really, really tight spot, it might be worth it if you're just going to lose otherwise. Anyways, unfortunately, that knocked me out of contention for the limited championship qualifier. So I'm going to have to find another way to qualify for the limited championship. Sad that this is how the story ends, but it is. I was 4 wins and 2 losses, and you need to be 6 wins and 1 loss if you're going to make the top 32. But that was not the last round. The last round, round 7, actually had some stakes. So you get 2,000 event tickets if you finish 5 wins, 2 losses in the event. And event tickets are about 10 for $1 or $10 for 100 event tickets. So you getting 2,000 event tickets nets out to you getting $200. So that's really high stakes for one match of Magic, actually. It's kind of uncomfortably high for me, but I will say I've done a bunch of Winabox events, where I do play single games of Magic for hundreds of dollars. So it's not unfamiliar territory. I know how to get myself into that headspace. So I shuffled up and match 7 had $200 on the line. In game 1, The opponent turned out to be on some kind of Jeskai-ish spells, but I didn't see much of his deck. I actually just won like weirdly quickly for my deck through normal creatures. I think he was having some trouble setting up whatever he was trying to do. And I had like Textbook Tabulator into Elemental Mascot, into Stadium Title Mage, into maybe Zealous Alorecaster, something like that. And I just bonked him for lethal pretty quickly. Game 2, inspired by my fast win, I thought maybe this matchup is all about tempo. So I made a really risky play that bit me really badly. He played the Summon Dromedary on 4, and that is the camel that has 4/3 for 4, Vigilance 2, return it to your hand, activate only as a sorcery. I Disdainful Stroked it. Counter target spell with mana value 4 or greater. My thinking in doing this was I had board presence at that time. The Dromedary was going to gum me up. If he spent the next turn bringing the Dromedary back and playing some silly little 2-drop, I could Tome Blast that thing. Then he has to recast the Dromedary. By that time, he's down to like 7 HP. I have 3 creatures out, and I can probably find a line, bringing back Tome Blast, attacking with a little bit of stuff, and I can get to lethal. So I felt pretty darn good about my position, and I thought that was worth it. Also because inspired by the fact that I had just failed in a game, possibly partly because I did not throw away material for tempo, I kind of course corrected in the other direction and said, you know what? This time I am going to throw away material for tempo. So, Disdainful Stroke on his Summon Dromedary. Well, boy, did I get punished. As the next turn, he played Arc of Hunger, the best, maybe the best card you can play for 4 mana. Disdainful Stroke would have hit it. I would have kept the Disdainful Stroke up if I hadn't just cast it. So, total waste of removal for the best card in his deck, probably, and one of the very best cards in the format. Youch. And then he slowly just went off on me. That was enough to recover his life total. I think he had a Practice Scrollsmith, which, he drained me and got to recast something. Then he played Color Storm Stallion, the 3/3 that makes copies of itself. Then he played the Red Emeritus, that when you triple spell it has a Lightning Bolt, and so on. Actually, the game stayed pretty close, because my deck was very controlling as well, and it could hang with such a slow game plan. But at the same time, I had sideboarded to make my deck more aggressive, to just try to beat him quickly like I did game 1, and I could not hang with this. So he did end up picking up game 2. Game 3, he got a little bit mana screwed, and I had one of the fastest start I could possibly have. So I did turn 2 Thunderjump Soloist. Turn 4, I played the Tackle Artist, the 4/3 trample that gets bigger when you play spells. Then turn 5, I played Artistic Process to make a 3/3 haste, putting 2 counters on my Tackle Artist and burning him for 3 with my Thunderjump Soloist. Then turn 6, I was able to Divergent Equation, another burn 3, bringing back my Artistic Process, play it again, another burn 3 on the next turn, making another 3/3 flyer, and that was the game. So I did not walk away empty-handed. I got a modest stack of collector booster packs out of my event tickets, but at the same time, I did not fulfill my goal of qualifying for the limited championship. So I'll of course be trying again next weekend when there will be limited championship qualifiers on Arena. And I definitely enjoyed playing in person quite a lot. I definitely recommend going to this kind of a tournament if you have the opportunity. It does take some, spending money. And I very, very strongly recommend going with friends. A huge shout out to the friends that I went with. That is the main thing that makes this sort of a weekend fun. I think going by yourself would probably not be particularly enjoyable, but going with friends is an absolute blast. When I tallied up all of my wins, if you include the extremely high stakes limited championship qualifier where I went 5 wins and 2 losses, the actually pretty darn high stakes last chance qualifier where I got 4 wins and 0 losses, and the extremely low stakes on-demand draft where I got 3 wins and 0 losses, I realized I actually went 12 wins and 2 losses for limited on the weekend, which feels pretty good for a big convention with a lot of good players. Although I would have really liked to shift just one of those wins into the limited tournament qualifier and out of a lower stakes event. Anyways, that was my experience at RC Washington, DC. Super, super fun event. I'm really looking forward to the next one. But until then, we'll just be playing on Arena. So until tomorrow, have tons of fun playing Magic, and don't be afraid to splash.